We'll do it again, my friend. I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
That's what I get for working all night and sleeping to the last minute possible. All right. So I apologize, man.
Don't worry
I'd
about it.
rather get it right than have to work around it. So, all right, here we go. Uh, Recording. Yes. Okay.
Yay.
Okay. Welcome, folks. My name is Jack. I am here with the Social Yet Distanced podcast. We're talking today with our friend Christopher Owens, author from Belfast, and we're going to talk about his couple of books, A Vortex of Securocrats, and his most recent book, which is just a piece of jewelry, if you ask me, called To Dethrone God. So here we are. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, Jack. How's it going?
It's going great, my friend. I am so glad to meet you. I've been digging into your work for the past couple of days, and I'm pretty excited to hear a little bit more about it. So
Thank you.
I'm okay with just jumping right in. How about you?
So am I. So am I.
Any introduction you like to make?
Well, yes, Belfast born and bred, and I've been writing since I was 12, but it's only really in the last couple of years where I thought I want to take this a bit, try and take it to the next level by actually getting books published. So thankfully, the first lockdown was a blessing in that regard because it made me think, okay, the time is now. I sat down and wrote what became A Vortex of Securocrats, which was a debut collection of prose and poetry. And the whole gist of it was basically that it was set in an alternative north of Ireland where talk, free speech, and also talk about the recent conflict had been suppressed, and so the only way people could discuss it was through prose and poetry. So it takes the form of a sort of government file of saying, okay, this is all the sort of recent sort of things we've collected from subversive groups, but in each one is a sort of what I like to think is a basic cry for someone who's basically has is remembering the conflict and the suffering that went on there, and it got good reviews, and we managed to sell about 100 copies, which I was very, very happy with because whenever I started off, I thought we'd only sell 2 copies. But that came out on Close to the Bone Publishing, and I have to give a big thanks to Craig Douglas, the publisher of that, for taking the chance on the book. So then, whatever about this time last year, I wrote a poem about realizing that the city of Belfast has greatly changed from whenever I was a kid, and I thought, you know what, there's a bit more to it. I think, this could actually be a novel or at the very least a novella. So then I thought, okay, well, it needs to have a narrator. So who is this person and why? What do they need to do? So I thought about the 1947 film Odd Man Out, where an IRA man gets shot in a robbery and has to make his way to the other side of the city. And I thought, okay, so this guy needs to get from one side of Belfast to the other. But why does he need to do that? And then I thought about the Irvin Welsh novel Filth, where this corrupt police officer who has a tapeworm in his stomach, and occasionally the tapeworm will actually take over the narrative and act as a kind of conscience. And I thought, right, okay, but why would this person need that sort of thing? And so I came up with a character, and there's a twist in it, which I can't really reveal, obviously, in Dethrone God. But what has happened, what I've noticed is whenever people have read the book, they have then gone back and reread it with the knowledge of the twist in mind to see if they get an alternative reading from it. And that's actually really nice because
Right.
normally when you finish a book, even though you've really enjoyed it, you think that was great, but I want to try something else. So the fact that people have actually read it and said, I actually then went back and reread it with that in mind, that's really cool. So it's done well for me. And we have a book launch this Thursday from when we're recording this in the on the 23rd of May in the Black Box in Belfast. So it's going well, thank you.
Well, that's great. And if you would please send me notifications about the event itself, and I'll promote that as well.
Sure
Um,
thing.
I have several friends in on your side of the pond there. Um, both Fran and Fran Locke and my buddy Badger. They both have made me an honorary Irishman. so, so I'm due for a trip, and a good book launch is a great excuse as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
let me ask you this, in reading up on you a little bit, I try to do prep. I don't always do so well, but the phrase that kept jumping out on me, to me about the Deep Throne God book, and maybe the question is about how it relates to A Vortex of Securocrats. But when you think of in terms of the theme, how would you say that they're different? I mean, is the difference in the difference between the Belfast you remember and the Belfast that it is? You know, are you old enough to remember the troubles and in those times? You know, that kind of stuff. I'm always curious to where that in your own personal history, where those stories emanate from. You know, they come from somewhere. And in most cases, as you well know, it's personal experience that drives that, at least for me. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. You know, the phrase uncomfortable truths of modernity, which one day I'll be able to say, is a, you know, it's an elaborate statement and it says a whole lot. And I'm curious, when you read that, does it apply? And what's your interpretation of that?
Well, thank you. There's a couple of questions there. So, well, for the first question, in terms of the difference between the two books, A Vortex is very much a book that is informed about the recent past. I don't think it's completely about the recent past, but it's heavily informed by it. Dethrone God, I think there's one reference to the recent conflict in it. It's more about just the sort of Belfast as a character and,
Right.
you know, the long history it has had and the impact it's had. And it's probably the closest that I'll ever get to writing Resurrection Man by Owen McNamee, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the finest book ever written, and was actually the book that pretty much made me want to be a writer whenever I first read it in 1990. In fact, funnily enough, it turns 30 years old this year, so I must write a bit about it. So in that context, it's not about the conflict or anything, because one thing I've noticed with an awful lot of writers, especially from over here, is if you write about the Troubles in some shape or form, you automatically get pegged as a Troubles writer, and for some reason, that limits their audience quite a bit. I mean, if you think about Padraig Fiach,
Right.
famous Belfast poet. It was his centenary recently, and they actually had a ceremony for him down in Belfast City Hall. But yet they were lamenting the fact that he's nowhere near as well regarded as the likes of Seamus Heaney or Paul
Right.
Muldoon or someone like that. And it's because he mainly wrote about the Troubles, especially in the later part of his life. And there has always been an element of the media, certainly in Ireland, North and South, but also in Britain, that has always viewed something like that as it's something to kind of be brushed under the carpet. I mean, even the term "the Troubles"
Right.
is a bit of a demeaning, condescending term. It's almost like a little play fight or something, as opposed to some very
Right.
serious business that went on here. So there's that. And then, in answer to your
Let
question,
me interrupt about that real quick, though. You know, I mentioned a good friend of mine, and she is probably the most prolific slash best writer I've ever seen on the planet. And you know, her output in volume is just astounding on top of everything else that she does. But the one battle that she seems to fight repeatedly is, I mean, it's racism to the naked eye. I mean, she's female. She's from Ireland. She is of Gypsy descent,
right?
and has ties to organizations that's, you know, have three letters involved, from historical perspectives. So it's like she got blacklisted immediately. And I wonder if it's the same for anyone who writes about the Troubles, because she is no holds barred and backs it all up with facts and history and her own experience. And I just wonder if that's the same for anybody who chooses that, what's the word I'm looking for? Scandalous or conspiratorial, or I don't know what you want to call it, but you know, the tales from that time. If you're writing about some truth versus the perception, you're in a lot of trouble, and you kind of don't really get up the ladder. And I wonder if you see that in Belfast as well. I mean,
Um, to,
hers
to
is sort of
yeah.
understandable because she lives in London.
Yeah.
So it's a
Well,
little different.
To a certain degree, but I think it's also in a slightly different way. I think that, in somewhere like London, if you were to talk about what actually happened during the conflict, you would make an awful lot of people very, very uncomfortable.
Right.
Whereas over here, although that's obviously the case, but as in literary circles, from my perspective and from what I've seen, it seems to be more a case that there's an element of, oh well, that's all over and done with. Why you talking about this? I mean, Bernard McLaverty famously once called it the elephant in the living room. The idea that we all know it's there, but you eventually just sort of you get to live around it, and then you come to accept it as part of the furniture.
And then you don't notice.
And then you don't notice exactly. So it's because even that there was a writer called Rosemary Jenkinson, and she wrote a piece for Fortnight magazine, which is quite a well-known literary magazine, current affairs magazine in the North. And she wrote a piece about literature post-conflict, and some of it I agreed with, some of it I didn't agree with, but there was a bit in it where she actually said, and I'm paraphrasing here from memory, but she basically said, as writers, we should team up and drum out all sort of Troubles references the way we drummed out racism in literature. And I'm kind of going, those are two very, very, very different things. But what was
Right.
interesting was she got a huge amount of backlash for it, and her publisher dropped her. Now, I think that's wrong. I think the publisher should have stood beside her. Now, if you're going to if you're going to conflate two things like that, you are going to get a bit of backlash. But for the fact that the publisher dropped her, I thought that was wrong. I thought that was cowardly. But I think that gives you an example of a certain middle class mindset that some of these people have, where they think, that's all over and done with. That's ancient history. Why aren't you talking about this or that or the other? And I mean, there's nothing wrong with talking about the newer aspects of Belfast. That's great. But for some people, they saw horrendous things and they experienced horrendous things during the conflict. And to simply just say, well, that's all in the past, move over, get over it, it's just not feasible.
Right. Right. Well, the images I've seen of Belfast recently, I mean, it's a beautiful city. And, I always had this really dark picture of shipbuilding and, the whole thing. But, like the open air places along the water and things like that, it seems to be a much, much different, much, much more friendly place.
Well, the old joke about Belfast was that we were always friendly to everyone except ourselves. Now, there's bit of a joke, but there is an element of truth in that, because
there may be some truth to that for all Irish people, according to what I've heard.
Well, there probably is, to be fair. But yeah, I mean, because like even when American tourists were coming over in the 90s, just as the conflict was coming to an end, they would always remark about just how friendly the population was. And as you say, it's originally it was a very typical industrial type city, because it was an old shipbuilding city, and as the years have gone on, it has developed and it has modernized in some shape or form, or has been gentrified, depending on your point of view.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, it looks gentrified. It looks like every other kind of open air square in every other city in every other world. And eventually, if there's not already, there'll be a Ferris wheel. And
there actually was a Ferris wheel at one point.
I figured there must have been. If there wasn't, I don't know. But that seems to be every major city you see nowadays. They have a huge Ferris wheel, as if that's the cool thing, I guess.
Yeah, so here we go. Here, get to the very top, and you can see the whole city. Yay!
Yay! Look at where I can go spend money. Look at all those places.
Yeah. Oh, look at that junkie lying in the corner.
Oh yes, gosh, stay away from that street.
Absolutely.
And by the way, you just paid $40 American to ride this stupid ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I really, really, really long for the day that my health and my finances make it possible for me to actually come over there, because, Badger O'Donoghue with Poetry Bust magazine is there. I would love to see him. Of course, my friend Fran is there, and many people attached to her as well. So I'm due for a trip, my friend. So save me a spot on the floor, will you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And hide me when immigration shows. So tell me more about the book. I've gone completely off theme, which is very normal.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's always where the interesting conversations happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of it. I just have to tone it down, and I talk too much. That's the problem. I can interview myself on the camera anytime I want. Um, let me ask you this. Did you find any particular issues or challenges while you wrote Dethrone God compared to a Vortex of Securocrats? Was it a different feel, a different way to writing, different perspectives? How would you attribute what challenges would you say you had to overcome to do that?
Well, first of all, because it's the first person narration, I had to write something that was, that for me personally was compelling for the reader. Vortex
Sure.
was a little bit easier by comparison because it's a collection, and because I had a general theme for the collection, I could then just sort of mold it into what I needed in order for it to fit. But when you're writing a novella or any sort of novel, and you have to make your main character at least interesting. Whether they're likable or not, it's a different matter, but they have to be interesting and you have to want to go with this person. Even if you take a film like Raging Bull, for example, De Niro's character is not a nice character in the slightest, but at the same time, you can't help but, you can't tear yourself away from the screen because what
Right.
you're seeing is just so visceral and it's almost like a car crash. Not quite the same extent in Dethrone God, but I just wanted you to go along with this person. And then
Right.
whenever the particular revelation happens, I wanted you to see this person's perspective on it, and then also want you to think: is the what I knew about this person or what I thought I knew about this person, was I right or was I wrong? And then that's what has led, as I say, some people to go back and actually reread the thing. And so it was tricky in that regard because ultimately, and also as well, you're kind of doing a bit of world building as well because even though he's getting from one side of Belfast to the other, even though I know the place very well, I haven't described that to an outside world, someone who's never been to Belfast, maybe hasn't even heard of it. And once again, this has to be interesting. You can't just be, like I'm walking along and there's a load of Starbucks and there's a couple of subways here and there. It's like, that could be anywhere, literally. So
Right.
what makes this particular spot very different from say London or New York or whatever? So those were the real challenges.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Um, do you have any desire or let me ask this the proper way. When I write, I try to write for the audience as much as possible. Um, but I'm also 9 times out of 10, I'm writing about my own experience. So, and that gets received in a number of different ways. And it kind of depends on the audience. But my question really is, has the reception that you're getting from the book, um, at least from those who have had the opportunity to fortune to read it, do you feel like the reception is in line as a standalone item, or do you feel like you're becoming known as Christopher Author Owens and that persona is kind of being developed and you're building expectations for your own? God, this is just an elaborate question, isn't it? Hey man, how do people like the book? That's what I mean.
Do you mean, am I building a brand, quote unquote? Um,
Well, I mean, I think we get associated with certain ways of writing. I mean, you think outlaw poet, that you think a certain thing. You think a classical poet, in European literature versus American, you're going to think something different. So I guess that's really kind of the question I'm asking: is where do you feel like it would fit in genre wise, and is that your preference?
I mean, genres, are obviously very useful things whenever you're selling and marketing books and describing them to people. But I think certainly whenever I'm writing them, I don't sit down and think, I'm going to write a science fiction thing or I'm going to write a thriller or whatever. I just write, and then once I start to see, I can maybe then start to maybe adjust it a little bit and fit it
Right.
into maybe certain little terrains where maybe it would be a little bit more sort of easier to say, oh, that would fit into that or the other. But I think that people who have certainly read both books and they've been I don't know if they see me as a particular persona or whatever. They just seem to be more about the the books themselves, which I'm happy enough with. Maybe it'll be
Yeah,
another
yeah,
couple of years before I actually it becomes a persona type thing, because then I have a back catalog to my name where
right.
they can say this person does this or does that. But I think in terms of, if you were to mean, I would say in terms of poetry per se, I like to think, although this is me saying this, everyone else will probably just go, "You're completely wrong, Christopher." I
Right.
like to think personally that I would sort of fit in alongside the likes, somewhere in between Charles Bukowski and Patrick Fiach, in the sense that
Right.
Bukowski basically wrote about whatever he wanted. Now, on one hand, that meant you got about 10,000 poems about going to the races, which doesn't interest me. But he always did, he always wrote from a level of honesty. And even though he's fallen out of favor in recent years with certain people, he'll always be a pivotal influence to me. And then say Patrick Fiach, just for the fact that he was able to do what he was able to do at that time, and even though he was not a great favorite among the Belfast literary scene at that time, he just carried on doing it regardless. So a combination of those two, I think, would be nice.
Yeah. Is there a Belfast literary scene now?
There is, yes, there definitely is. I mean, there's a couple of various ones. I mean, you have, the one, like say, one out of Queen's University, where you'd have people like the Seamus Heaney Centre, and
Right.
you would have people like Glenn Patterson and all right in there, and they're all very nice people, and they all do right good stuff. And then you have the likes of the Tangerine magazine, which is run by Michael McGee, who published a book not so long ago called Close to Home, which got a lot of really really good reviews. And you have certainly a certain an underground scene happening there as well. So you do have various literary scenes, but they all it's I'm not really 100% certain that they all talk to each other, and they're
No,
maybe
they
not
definitely
necessarily,
don't.
yeah, or maybe not. I mean, maybe not that they're not sympathetic to each other, but because they all do very different things, they maybe see themselves as not necessarily allies, but just more, not allies, but they're not in competition with each other. So it's just they just don't
Right.
talk to each other, from my
Right.
perspective, anyway. Maybe it's just they don't talk to me.
Right. Gotcha. Do you feel like this story is a story that could not have been written except for the scenery of Belfast? I mean, is this applicable, do you think, to other places?
I think if it had been written about somewhere else, it would have been a slightly different novel. I think the character of Belfast and the history of Belfast and the weight of history, certainly, of Belfast that weighs upon me, certainly whenever I'm out in the city centre, I think has contributed massively to the certainly Dethrone God, to a slightly lesser degree Vortex, because it's something else slightly. But although Belfast is a character in it, but no, I think Belfast is pretty much sort of intrinsically linked inside Dethrone God. Yes, so I think if it had been somewhere like in Camden in London, it would have been completely different.
Right, right. So tell me about the title, because since I haven't had the chance to read the book, um, where does Dethrone God come from, and how does it fit into the overall picture?
Well, during the in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and
Hmm.
the Black Lives Matter riots, the phrase "attack and dethrone God" was trending on Twitter for a little while, and it seemed to sort of sum up. I think that was also the same week the Colston statue was pulled down in Bristol and pushed into the sea. So there seemed to be, regardless of what you think of that period, there was definitely a real iconoclastic air and vibe in the air, and the phrase "attack and dethrone God" just seemed to sum it up perfectly. So
Right.
later on, I found out that was actually a phrase I think the Weather Underground used in the 70s, as a kind of mantra, and then it then cropped up in relation to 2020, because some conservative commentators started using it as a phrase to sort of sum up the times, and then of course, because we live in the age of social media, people then just started making fun of that. But the phrase just really struck with me, because I say, just it summed up the period perfectly. And I thought, right, okay, that would actually be really good for, if I was ever going to write a book, that would be really good for a title. So then I thought I'll shorten it because attacking Dethrone God it's a bit of a mouthful, whereas just Dethrone God is just that 1-2 punch that you need.
Yeah,
And
I think it's
but
perfect.
yeah, but notably I put it in brackets because then that adds an extra layer of either irony or ambiguity to it, just whatever you fancy.
Mhm.
So basically, it just comes down to the fact that I thought it was a really cool title, and I thought, be it mercenary, at least it would help people notice the book. Certainly, as to the actual relation to the actual text itself, I mean, I've heard one or two interpretations of it. I don't really want to say because it'll end up spoiling the actual
Sure, sure.
secret in the book. But I hadn't thought about it, and I mean, they do work in a way, but I genuinely hadn't thought of them. So it's just purely that it just seemed to work. It's the same with a vortex of Securocrats. I mean, Securocrats is a term that the political party Sinn Féin used to use about people who were allegedly trying to wreck the peace process, and usually it was just an excuse to cover up for the things that they had mucked up themselves. And somehow I just once again just a vortex somehow the phrase a vortex came into my head and I went, God, that'd be great for a book. So that's just purely where it comes from, because ultimately, whenever I always think about Jello Biafra from Dead Kennedys when he once talked about this idea that whenever he was making the Dead Kennedy stuff and then also his own solo stuff, you have to look at, you're just say you're looking in a record shop, you're looking through the records, and you see this cover, and you go, "What's that?" And then you see the title, and you go, "What's that?" And that motivates you to take the record home. So, for example, Frankenchrist, obviously Dead Kennedy's album, which has the Shriers people on the cover,
Mhm.
and you're going, and even the name Dead Kennedys, you're going, "What's that?" So there's a little bit of that going on there.
Sure, sure. You know, I coined the phrase emotional orphan for my art probably 15 years ago now. And it's probably one of the greatest things I ever did because emotional orphan was an unknown term at the time. And I think it's a little bit better recognized now. But, I pinned that name down. And so chances are, if you see that, you're going to think of me and my art, not necessarily my writing. Sometimes it depends on what profile I was writing under, on my own computer at that point. But,
Hmm.
it's the shock value is important. And for me, Dethrone God has implications that you would want for a book title. My mind goes racing into, okay, wait a minute. Who are we going to dethrone here? Yeah, am I God? Is the crown God? Is Ireland God? And so, whether you're making a YouTube video or whether you're writing a book or whether it's just a poem or whatever the case might be, that shock value slash intro into what you're doing comes at the first split second. And it's hard to get rid of that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Once you've scored that point, it's hard for them to shut it off. And it's made a difference. And I think that Dethrone God is an excellent title that does that. Certainly for me.
Thank you,
I
thank
hope
you.
it does for everybody else. Let's talk a little bit about future projects. And if you'd like to, I'd love to hear you read just a little bit. Give us a preview of what's going on. You okay with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, cool. So tell us about your future. You got upcoming projects, things you're interested in exploring. How
Yep.
do you see how do you see that
Currently,
evolving?
okay, cool. Well, currently, I'm working on another novel slash novella. I maybe want to make it a wee bit longer this time,
Mhm.
and it's early days yet. It's going to be once again, it's going to be about a specific individual, but I wanted to be a bit more about a community as opposed to just one particular person. So we'll see how that goes. I'm also working with the artist Michael Hing on a. He's going to be. I've basically given him a selection of my poetry, and he's going to draw them, and so we're going to hopefully publish it as a sort of mini graphic novel. Now that's going to take a few years because artists are notoriously slow, and obviously I've got various other things on the go as well. So just whenever it's done, it'll be done. I'm also working on a
Warning: my picture poetry book has been in the works for for 15 years.
Years.
So,
Well, this has been in the works for 2 years at the least, so I've only got another 13 years to go. Then, so there's that. I'm also working on the the autobiography slash memoir of I don't want to reveal it just yet, but there's a
okay.
band who I really like, a pioneering English band who were started off as a punk band and then sort of ended up influencing the likes of Metallica and stuff like that. But I know the singer quite well, and he very kindly granted me several interviews, and so we're going to compile that as an autobiography slash memoir. Now that's been going on for a couple of years now because it's quite intensive because there's an awful lot of research involved
I would
in
think,
terms of dates and also just making sure that the tone is right because ultimately we're dealing with someone who is obviously relating their life experience to me, and I don't want it to just be a standard rock memoir because there's been an awful lot of those
sure.
lately. And
Yeah,
I mean, they are what they are. They're a good read, but I want this to just be something slightly different. So it has taken a little bit longer than what I'd anticipated, but there's some amazing stories in it. And also it's not just in terms of rock and roll as well. There's also great personal stuff in there as well about
right.
overcoming depression and having to live with it and facing up to responsibility and consequences of your actions and all that caper. So I'm really looking forward to that. And
Yeah, that sounds exciting. People often forget in that realm that it's much more than what it was like on tour. These people have lives, they have families, they have friends, they have tragedies like everybody else. And I think it's important to shine a light on that because it also helps to clarify who they are as an artist.
absolutely, because you get an awful lot of people who, what I mean, for want of a better term, normies who would say like, why do these people always end up on drugs? They genuinely can't understand it, and you're trying to explain that,
Right, right.
if you're just playing show after show after show, night after night, and this is your living, you physically can't. It would be like working from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6 days a week. You would be knackered at the end of it. So you need some things to, just to give you a little pick me up. But trying to explain that to some people is impossible. So a really good memoir will make people realize, as you say, that there is more to it than just getting up on stage and playing.
Right. Well, I'm a retired addiction counselor too, so I have lots of answers for those questions. But that the thing about it is we want to maintain the humanity in it all, and that's what gets lost sometimes in the drama and the labels and the electricity of some interesting story of throwing TVs out the window and such.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so. Is there a section of the book you'd like to read? You want to take a couple minutes to read for us and give us a little preview of the book?
Yeah, sure. What I'll do is I'll read a wee bit from the book, and then I'll read one or two bits from Vortex of Securocrats as well. So
Sure.
there's one particular bit that I was looking at, and because funnily enough, I actually went to see the band the other night as well, so it works out nicely. So let's see if I can find it here.
Do you know this guy, Ren? I think he's from Belfast. No, you know what I'm talking about?
The name vaguely rings a bell. Carry on.
Yeah, he's a younger guy. I say younger. He's probably your age. But I just of all the new music I've seen lately, I really like this guy, man. He is so uber talented. It's amazing. And any kind of music you can imagine, he does it. So it's worth a check, but it's not, it's not also old school like me and you might prefer.
What sort of stuff? What sort of stuff does he do?
That's the trick. I was gonna try to describe it, but I can't. It depends on what song you're listening to. Lots of electronic, metal. Punk's edge. There's some lounge music. I mean, that's kind of part of the mystique of this kid is he's so widespread. REN, and he lives in Canada, but I believe the first time I ever saw him, he was in Belfast on with the big plaza there in Buskin. So yeah, it's worth a look because he's gotten pretty big now, and He's just a genius. That's all. I am. I've always kept my eyes and finger on the pulse of what's going on in music, and nothing's really struck me like this in a while. So
Oh, nice
I
one.
always share.
Nice one. It's
And
always
if
good.
you're, if you're an 18-year-old teenage girl, there's nothing better. I can assure you. So,
Okay, so here's a little bit from Dethrone God.
thank you.
So, what song do you want played at your funeral? This is the question that is normally asked at a certain time of the night, whenever the initial glee has slowly evaporated and a more serious, introspective mood has overtaken the collective mindset. The time whenever friends open up about their newly discovered vulnerabilities and mourn the mistakes of the past. Depending on the choice of words, this period has the potential to be a piercing insight into the direction of said friends' lives or a maudlin diatribe. Whenever others are asked, they tend to think of a song that scarred them in some shape or form, one that was their first realization that they were not invincible. I've often presumed this is because, if we believe the idea that we die a little every day, the song in question acts as a kind of landmark to the innocence of youthful belief. One such example was Everything's Gonna Be Alright by Sweetbox because of the strings, which I later discovered were lifted from a Bach piece. According to one friend, he recalled hearing it one day when he and a few cousins were at the bowling alley one Saturday morning. Apparently, there was a moment whenever he rolled a gutter ball, which coincided with a particular crescendo in the song. At that moment, he tells me, he realized that this was the first genuinely perfect moment in his life and that there would be very few moments from then on that would match that. Being honest, I would love to have been there when that happened. The sound of the scuffled pins toppling, the early morning vibes fueled by Sunny D and Coca Cola, and the feeling that 12-year-olds have when they're starting to expand their social boundaries. I can't deny that it's an intoxicating feeling. Don't know if I'd had the same reaction as my friend, but he's always been a thinker, something the boisterous, culty image hides quite well. Regardless, the tune does fit his personality, studied, hopeful, tapping into tradition in an attempt to move forward and create something new, but leaning just a little too heavily on the former and becoming weighed down by the centuries of lies. Another friend wants Next Year by the Foo Fighters played. He even has the opening bars of the song tattooed on his neck. Apparently, in the Irish bars in Amsterdam, he caused a scene when a tin whistler proceeded to play the song based on the tattoo and the whole bar sang along. I suspect there's probably a bit of exaggeration going on here. Knowing him, I'd say the tin whistler bit is true, but it was only a nearby entourage that actually sang. He's someone who is always in a state of becoming, a footballer with potential. He then discovered girls and drink. Even though he's someone who is naturally intelligent and quick to resolve an issue, he makes a living in a call center while doubling as a taxi driver on weekends. A genuine, lovable lunatic who cannot help but attract people to him whenever he's out for a few. Some people just have a natural charisma about them that it engulfs others nearby, and soon they are exchanging pleasantries with this complete stranger. Maybe we need more people like that. I don't know. But I've often thought that Next Year was the most apt choice for him, not just in terms of the lyrical connotations, but the melody itself. Wistful, nostalgic, and hopeful. A perfect eulogy for someone who could have, but is seemingly content. Some tend to boast about playing something upbeat and intense, and while that may very well be funny in a jokey conversation, it has an alienating effect in real life. The jarring get disconnect between the mourners and a private joke makes it seem like some kind of personal violation, as if you're deliberately provoking someone into doing and saying something that they may regret seconds afterwards. But when it comes to me, I often give some variation on the line, I'll be dead so you can play whatever you want, which is undeniably true. Be it Bridge Over Troubled Water, Solitude Sometimes Is, or even Old LA Tonight. However, if I'm being serious, I'd say Beyond Good and Evil by Crime in the City Solution. One of many songs that can stop time for me. I've always loved that it's a song seemingly built on contradictions. It invokes feelings of beauty and sadness, a melody that is all consuming with passion, but played like a sloppy country barroom jam at 4 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon where beams of light peek through the wooden blinds. Vocals that sound like they're being delivered by a drunkard who can't quite express the intensity of his feelings, but has a go anyway, while quoting Nietzsche. Notably, the chorus is only delivered twice in the song, For most, the chorus is the anchor for the song, hence why everyone joins in. So to reduce it to the bare minimum is a clear attempt to not only throw away the safety net for the listener, but also force them to concentrate on and soak up the rich atmosphere radiating throughout. Hearing those female backing vocals against Simon Bonney's low baritone delivers something transcendent. Whenever I hear it, I feel for a few moments that the shackles of my being are lifted and that I can float into an autonomous zone that continually soars beyond the skies and into the stars. For me, the key line is just a beggar and a thief holding on to the suspension of disbelief. Something I've felt about myself doing many's a time over the years. An inversion of being in the gutter, but looking at the stars, hoping against my will for something to happen that will ensure. What that something is, I'm never really certain. Sometimes it could be contentment. Sometimes it could be wealth. Other times it could be knowledge. And while I've never considered myself a thief, the motif of beggar does strike a chord with me. Someone forgotten and invisible by day, surviving a cutthroat city filled with others of this ilk. It feels akin to having a purpose in this life. The image of, in the tiring rain, you're my baby again, is a staple of melodrama in Hollywood, but the use of tiring is an interesting choice. Is Bonnie referring to nature wearing down the women of his dreams, or is he referring to the town of Tiring in India, giving the tale a more widescreen image akin to a David Lean film? Epic yet intimate, celebratory yet melancholic, aspirational yet fatalistic. There's an infinite amount of love that we refrain from sharing, preferring the stoic outsider approach. This song is what happens whenever that persona breaks down in the face of the ultimate adversary. Real love that will save you as the dead rise from their graves and when the lightning smites everything you hold sacred. That's why I would want to be played at my funeral. Hopefully that should answer your question.
Man, I really am digging that. I like your writing style a lot, Chris. I think it's
Thank you.
I'm right in the middle of the story. It's like now I want to know what happens. Guess I'll have to buy a book, and I would suggest that for the rest of you as well. So, Chris, I really, really enjoyed that, man, and I look forward to reading a lot more of it, quite honestly. And I hope that
Thank
the
you very
audience
much. Thank you.
will pick up our cues. So you had some other work as well?
Yes, I'll read you one piece from A Vortex of Securocrats. I'll give you now, because I read that was a nice sort of strand of it. I'll give you a poem, and
Okay.
we'll see. We'll go for this one now. This one's called Westlink Enterprise Center. In the context of what you read, of the titles will make sense, but this one's called Westlink Enterprise Center. Located in a quiet corner of the estate, its presence is felt due to the gleaming black enamel and golden carvings. All around, scrap metal battles with broken wood for supremacy of the estate. Thick, heaving moss procure from the structures. A dismal place to die, and an even more dismal one to place a plaque marking a death. In the vicinity, men with cuts on their knuckles and disintegrating baseball caps can be seen laughing about matches, arguing over player statistics. The new guy listens conspiratorially. The one who saw it happen still works here. He's in the unit 5 doors up, the one in front of the mound. He remembers a snap, then trees rustling. He thought nothing of it at the time. Today, he considers the swooping vortex that comes to mind when he sleeps, a myriad of pink, blue, and magenta mixing into the black background. He is thrust into a zone of light. An ever-present hand gestures to him to grasp it and to begin all over again. The moon is barely visible. The streetlights radiate a seedy, sinister-looking incarnation of yellow, which darkens the unlit. Located in a quiet corner, the plaque signifies dignity, restraint, and remembrance. But there is no name, just a date and a description.
Really nice. Pardon me. I really like that as well. What I'm noticing is, and I'm sure this probably isn't the case, or maybe, I don't know. My writing style is I tend to free form, like vomit, basically on the page, whatever the thoughts are that are coming. And then, I laughed and made a joke about the book that I was working on taking 15 years. And part of the reason for that is because I keep going back and reshaping the way that vision was. And so I go from like this long rambling, like free form thought process to whittling down what's necessary and what's not. And it's always a delicate balance between how much to leave and how much to take away, because I'm telling a personal story in a way. So my memory tends to taint it, so I don't perceive it as how it's being heard. And I just wonder if your writing style is anything at all like that, or if you start with an idea, or how would you describe that for you? Because I start with the mass and run it through the cone or the funnel to get it to its last, iteration, I guess.
It can take a couple of different forms for me. Usually, whenever I start, I always start off writing a poem, just simply because I love the format of it. I think there's something very simple and very direct about a really, really good poem that can say more than a few words than a whole book can. So what happens is sometimes I may start off with what they used to call the take a pen for a walk exercise, which, as you say, is sort of can almost be like vomiting on the page sometimes. And then you go away and you look at it and go, okay, there's a germ of an idea there. I like that sentence, but the rest of it's crap, or just it's no good. So it depends on that. So that's one approach I take. Sometimes I have a particular image, like for example today. I had to go downtown to get a couple of things, and there was a particular image I just saw regarding a phone box. Now, obviously, phone boxes are pretty much defunct in 2024. So there's just something about it. I thought, right, okay. So I think I'm going to use that image for the book that I'm currently writing. So sometimes I have one image, and then I'll base something around it. And then other times I have a particular theme where I think I want to talk about this, and then I'll start writing, and then gradually I'll refine it. So there's a couple of different ways I would kind of approach it. Generally, the most popular one tends to be I have a particular image, and then I'll work around it that way, maybe with, a little bit of free form, or maybe with, think I have this image, I also have this theme, let's stick it together and see what happens.
Right. Yeah, that was my whole thing. And part of the reason it's been so slow going is because I want to have matching art to every word that I have on the manuscript. So, and that's been the thing. It's like my perception of those ideas, my experiences, and the way that I view those things doesn't necessarily always fit into what the theme of the whole book has been. And I think that you accomplished that really well. I mean, it reads as if it's taken a lot of thought and then paired that thought into something else versus starting with the idea and writing backwards. It's hard for me to do that. And unfortunately, like I don't have the academic education as well. I mean, other than what I've learned on my own, which is a shitload. I'm not a formal poetry student. I don't understand literature. I haven't read every book I'm supposed to have read. And I don't particularly understand or give a shit about forms, poetic forms. But I have things that I like outlaw poetry or rebellious poetry that smacks you in the face, or something that tells a story that might involve blood that you have sacrificed on behalf. And yes, I'm still here, kind of thing. So it's nice to hear that perspective from you, and that it actually still does work the opposite direction.
But also as well, they see this idea that people have about, you must have gone to university and you must have done this and done that. I mean, that's, okay, yes, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But at the same time as well, there's also nothing wrong with just taking the rule book and just throwing it away and doing your own thing, because that's usually where the more interesting things happen. I mean, I'm not saying that, nothing interesting doesn't come out of university. That's not the case. But, if you were to say, I mean, I went to university and I certainly did creative writing. I mean, my teacher was Maeve McGuckin, who's quite a well-known Irish poet. But one thing I noticed is that there were always, I mean, it's a tricky one because whenever you're young, and I was 20 at the time, you want people to be really, think, oh, wow, your work's absolutely brilliant. And usually they just kind of smiled and nodded politely at my work. And
Right.
I mean, I don't think the work that I was doing was terrible by any stretch. I do think it was a little bit better than smiling and nodding politely, but obviously these things aren't for everyone. So, and I think sometimes when you go through a formal education, sometimes that can sort of iron out some of the more interesting aspects of you. And it could also sometimes put people off because I know some people who went on to do a master's in creative writing and they ended up becoming not necessarily disillusioned with it, but they would always talk about how people would always be very polite about their work. But generally speaking, no one ever actually said that work was really good. It was just constantly, no one ever said it was crap either, but it was just constantly, you might want to do that, you might want to do that. So it almost felt like that, the joy for them of writing went out the window, and you have to be careful about that sometimes because, especially I mean, I was reading, I recently read, because as I review books for the Pensive Quill, and I recently reread the Neon Bible by John Kennedy Toole, and there's obviously that famous story about him sending a confederacy of dunces to Robert Gottlieb at Simon and Schuster, and he famously didn't understand the novel. He famously said it doesn't have a plot, which is kind of the whole point. And he just said you need to go. He just said you need to go back and rewrite it. Well, what do you mean? Go back and rewrite it? Like, I mean, is it just basically to put a plot in, which could end up ruining the book? So sometimes people who have fixed ideas about, what literature or poetry can sometimes be their own worst enemy.
Right. Well, and I think for me, it's not so much about the academic piece of it, except for the part where I could have focused on the classes where I would have learned the things that excited me, like the literature. I mean, and where this all comes from is this started off a conversation. It's actually why social yet distance even exists, is because, my friend Fran, she had a certain type of education, and under the UK system, there's certain things, and they learn certain things about literature and poetry, and so it's that base knowledge that I never really got. It's not about the PhD level understanding of poetry. It's not that at all. It's just sometimes because I call myself a poet, or because I'm in the world that I'm in all the time, I feel that's my own personal feelings, but I feel a little bit like I'm a poser because I speak sometimes, not that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm certainly no expert. And I don't want to mistake anybody with the idea that I think I am, because I'm certainly not. And my goal is to learn as much as possible. And, the podcast and the videos and everything that we do is based in getting that message to other people, because they're out there too. And, a local American friend talks about, he's very prolific and sells lots of books. And, one of the things that we look at is, there is a girl somewhere in Birmingham, Alabama, who needs words that are in a book somewhere. Yes. And those words, if they get to her, could change her life for the better. And whatever that looks like is, I don't know. I'm not in charge of that part. But what I do know is if Mary Sue in Birmingham, Alabama doesn't know that book exists, she ain't never going to have it. So I kind of treat it as a responsibility to make sure the words are going to get out there, that they're going to be there, and that, if you want to learn more, you always can. And if you want to spend $1 or $2 and buy a book, then please do, because you're just going to make yourself smarter in the end. And absolutely. I don't want to go to my grave thinking that those books are going to disappear one day, because they could. In the world we're in these days, there ain't no telling what might happen.
Yeah, and also as well, I also find as well that people are I mean, you could probably argue this goes back to the internet, where even though people have the world at their fingertips, and there's a bright, it is, it's, as someone once said, you have every single classic book that has ever been written, you can pretty much have at your fingertips, and yet you'll have people who have no knowledge of anything apart from a very, very specific area of something, maybe like, say, anime or something like that. And, nothing against anime or their
Sure.
fans. But, that sort of general all rounded sort of knowledge that people seemingly used to have is maybe not quite as prevalent as much nowadays. Now, maybe a lot, maybe I'm misreading that, but or maybe I'm misremembering that. Just because I'm an old bastard now. I'm 38. I'm nearly, So there's an element of back in my day and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, I do genuinely think that people used to have a sort of better general knowledge of things, whereas nowadays they only have very specific knowledge, and obviously because of the ubiquity and the algorithms of social media that has obviously created a type of person, and unfortunately it's breaking through to that person. So as you say, you might have someone in Fife, Alabama, or you could have someone in San Francisco or whatever who could relate very well to what we're doing. And the fact that we now have this platform and we could potentially get our work out to those people is a brilliant thing. So we can't completely knock the whole internet thing.
Right. I think that again, that was part of the whole impetus is, people in Europe write books and people in the US write books, and never the twain shall meet, apparently, unless we do something about that. And I know there's a lot of great stuff being put out here that the folks in the UK and Ireland, my friends and circles around the world, Africa, wherever, Australia, wherever, we're all connected with that same love of the word. And we all deserve to have access to all the words, not just whatever we're served up. And, it's a minor form of rebellion, but fuck the labels. Fuck, anything that's going to keep the words from getting into the hands of the people that really need it. Because you and I love it. And we get whatever rewards we get from it, but they don't know, or there may come a day where it may not be easy to access what they might need to know. And I just don't want to see that happen. And every day I learn something about the Beats or, Kerouac and those guys, or, the New York crowd or the Black Mountain people, or, all these different genres. So, to say I'm not educated is not true. But to have that base knowledge is not, I don't have it. Less and less I feel like I miss it because I gain it every day. It's what I do. I read.
And that's half the journey of growing, is that you do learn something different every day, and that sort of broadens your horizons and makes you see the world very differently. There are an awful lot of people who just seem to think that basically they know what they know and that's it. But part of the whole thing is that you are a different person that at the age of 38 that you were when you were 18. There's things that I really appreciate now that if you'd given me at 18 I wouldn't have appreciated at all. So that's that is the beauty of life. That's the beauty of growing up and realizing this sort of thing. If you had said to me at 18, okay, write a book, I would have written something completely different from To Dethrone God. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it would have been any good or not is a different matter, but I would have written something. So the fact that I'm now at the age where I can write something like that, I'm very happy with that.
Right. I agree 100%. I laughed when you said, back in the day, because I was laughing because, and this is actually a little piece of gratitude that just floated out of this conversation was, I sit here and get all depressed, but back in the day, I was in jail and drunk, so, I'm doing a lot better than I did back in the day. And there's been a lot of progress down a lot of hard roads to get me where I am. So I'm very grateful.
And the fact that you're taking that energy and funneling it into, the social distance podcast and also the social media page as well. And having the interviews, that's a great thing. And it's a real great purpose to have.
Sure it is. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I hope we do well at it. And it's people like you, my friend, that make us shine. And I appreciate you being here with us today.
I'll say I'm greatly honored by you inviting me, because the fact that you had Zach on a couple of weeks ago, who obviously published To Dethrone God very kindly, and he very kindly gave me that shout out. That's it's a nice thing because usually whenever you're writing something, you write away in isolation and you don't really think because it's very different from being
Right.
either a musician or a stand-up comedian because those two you need a crowd. I mean, you can write music all you want, but ultimately, if you want to see how it works, you have to get in front of a crowd. Stand-ups need to get in front of a crowd, whereas writers don't have to. I mean, we can give it to one or two people to say, "What do you think?" So the fact that you put this book out, and then someone comes back and says, I'd be interested to have you on my podcast, or I'd be really, I really enjoyed that, or I'd be interested in reading your book. When people say that to me, it's quite mind blowing in a way. So it's all good.
Dude, I'm just looking for subscribers on my YouTube channel. That's all.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that, especially with the way YouTube's going at the moment as well.
Oh man. Well, I've grown in that area. We can talk about that later, but make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Thank you, folks. Anything else that we should cover, Christopher? I really have enjoyed this time, man. I'd like to do this anytime you want, man.
Absolutely.
Anytime there's a project, anytime you got thoughts, and on a personal level too, if you want to shoot the breeze, man, just feel free to reach out.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for asking me interesting questions and being interested as well. I would just say, if you ever go on to the Pensive Quill, that is a site that is run by Anthony McIntyre, who is quite a notable figure in Ireland. He was also involved in with the Boston College case, which is currently has collapsed for a variety of reasons into another shambles. Right. For a variety of reasons, usually the cowardice of Boston College and the vindictiveness of the police. But anyway, so he has a blog called The Pensive Quill, and I have a column there every Friday where I review books and music in some shape or form, and sometimes I'll occasionally just put up my own writings. So if you're interested, just check out The Pensive Quill, especially check it out always, but especially on Fridays whenever I do write for it. I also occasionally write for a site called Chord Blossom, which is a site dedicated to music from the north of Ireland. Now, I maybe only contribute about maybe 3 or 4 articles a year, but I've been writing there for 10 years, so there's a whole backlog of stuff if you're interested. And just check out the Facebook page, check out my books, of course, and that'll be me.
Thanks, mate. I tell you, we'll put links to everything we got here, including the Pensive Quill and the whole list that you got. I'll put I'll pick the important stuff out of there, and if there's anything I forget, let me know later. Because we can always make changes, my friend.
Absolutely.
I think we've had a great afternoon, my friend. I really appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you guys for being here as well. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Social Yet Distanced podcast. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jack. Take care.
All right, buddy. You hang on.